There's going to be waves of school closures all across the country, and there'll be some city that figures out how to fight back.
Yeah. Right. But there's a long-term fight as well to like not only save the schools, but frankly to boost them up. I mean,
Shuttering a school is more than mothballing a brick and mortar edifice. It is hanging a clothes sign on the hopes of a community. With Boeing and Microsoft and Starbucks and Amazon, with wealth just dripping everywhere, there's plenty of money. The question is, do we build a fight big enough to get it for our kids and our schools?
From Seattle's 2009 school closures to the 2024 cuts was the title of a meeting organized by Seattle DSA's working group, SOS, Save Our Schools, on September 6th. Jesse Hagopian and Dan Troccoli shared their experiences in this ongoing struggle. Both were leaders of the Social Equity Educators, a rank-and-file caucus within the Seattle Education Association of the time. They fought against the school closures implemented in 2009, most of which were later reversed. As we face new school closures in Seattle in 2024, along with the threats to educators' jobs and wages and significant disruption to our communities, it is crucial to learn from their experiences. This recording begins with Jesse Hagopian's opening remarks.
Stan was saying that I should read my poem about the school closures first to kick it off, so I'll do that. I wrote this recently about connecting the school closures here in Seattle to the genocide in Gaza. It's called Droughts and Floods. A bombshell drops from under the brooding rain clouds. 20 Seattle schools will be shuttered. A funding drought. Money trees withering. Barren education amidst verdant corporations. Desolate schoolyards surrounded by the lush greenbacks of the Amazon jungle. Parched, blistered lips of children while Starbucks cup runneth over. Dry riverbeds where funding once flowed amidst a monsoon of Microsoft profits. Schools on cracked, cloven earth with dry scars while Boeing makes it rain in Seattle until the filthy gutters of mansions overflow with cash. Boeing also makes it rain in Gaza, a downpour of GBU 39 bombs sweeping away every university and hundreds of schools. The Al-Sardi school in Nasrit was one of them. 14 children's voices washed away in a deluge of avarice. One young Palestinian survivor, Ahmad al-Mahmeda, asked cascading, soul-drenching questions. Why? Why did they bomb us? Why? I want to know why. Why? We are all children in the school. There are those who dread the unyielding torrent of children's questions. They dam up the resources that once ran to Seattle classrooms, creating cesspools of cash for missiles whose explosions drown out the sounds of youthful inquiry. Always enough treasure to flood playgrounds with blood. Never enough to water gardens of learning and love. Children's blood is heavier than gold. It must be conserved, like the last canteen when crossing a sun-scorched land. But if it is to be spilled, let it irrigate the olive trees under which students will study and dream. Let it nurture a global intifada stretching from the Northwest to Nazareth. Thank you. And it's awesome to get to virtually share the stage with Dan. We're in the struggle here for a long time together, and it's good to see you. Hope you're well. That sets the stage for the funding priorities that lead to the absurd situation of living in one of the richest cities the world has ever known and saying there isn't enough money to keep schools open. It's just flatly nonsensical. And I want to have us look back to 2009 and some of the arguments we made back then to help us understand how to wage this struggle today. And so a few points I want to stress. I think maybe I was destined to be in this fight because my mom was in the struggle to save my elementary school, University Heights, and they closed that, saying that it was unsafe, right? And now it's like a major, all these different, it's the most coveted real estate in the area now, right? But they ended up closing it and sending us all further north. But from 2007 to 2009, Seattle closed 11 schools while I was teaching at Madison Middle School. And this effort was led by Broad Foundation graduate Maria Goodlow Johnson. So the Broad Foundation, Eli Broad is a billionaire who's used his money to destroy public education. And so he trains cadres of corporate reformers to go in and just destroy schools, right? His graduates helped to push for the closing of 50 schools in Chicago. And we saw their plans in Philadelphia and, in New Orleans, there are no public schools at all. Because after Hurricane Katrina, they were able to come in with the charter schools and their privatization agenda. And Maria Goodlow Johnson was the superintendent of the Seattle Public Schools, Broad Foundation graduate, who came in. Her first act was to end the Department of Race and Equity, and then to propose closing schools, right? And unfortunately, the school closures were supported by the union. It seems just completely nonsensical that you have a corporate education reformer backed by a billionaire and the union's on the same side, right? Of like, yes, let's shutter neighborhood schools and disrupt people's lives and all the connections that teachers and students have built for years, the community that they've built for years. The union's just gonna be on the side of severing that. So Vicki Jambor was the person who put forward the first resolution in the union against the school closures. I worked with her on the resolution. She put it forward and she was the only one who voted for it. The union leadership convinced everybody that if we didn't vote to close schools, then it would mean there wasn't enough money for teachers and they would lay off teachers, right? And so they had everyone scared and they convinced teachers to vote for the school closures. The next round of closures in 2009, we had more time to build up our caucus. We had built more relationships and it was a heated debate and we ended up losing by just a vote or two. It was pretty much split 50-50, but we still lost. Dan's gonna talk more about the organizing effort because we didn't give up then. The union didn't back us, but we formed our own organization and continued the fight. But what I want to talk about is some of the arguments we put forward about why closing schools was nonsensical. They said we have to close schools because there's under enrollment and there isn't enough capacity, right? And so we just went to the school district's own projections of where students were projected to be at different schools. And we pointed out to them that you're closing the schools in the neighborhoods where you have the highest projected enrollment increases. So it was just, it was absurd, right? And lo and behold, 1,200 more students than expected showed up just a few months after they closed the schools, right? So then you could fast forward to a Seattle Times story in 2013 that showed the school district had to scramble to quote ease overcrowding due to a quote crush of students. They wrote quote that enrollment predictions turned out to be here we go, and no, quote, enrollment surged about 7% from 2008 through 2011, forcing some schools to hold classes in gyms, auditoriums, and portables parked on school grounds, right? And I think that we should look at a parallel to a situation where we had an unprecedented global pandemic that a lot of families didn't feel safe sending their kids to school, and filtered out. And so the idea that we see enrollment dip and we immediately close schools, right, rather than attract people back in, right, doesn't make any sense, and it shows they haven't learned the lessons of the last round of school closures. The other thing is, you should be aware, of course, they always argue that school closures are about saving money. And in fact, they rarely save money. And 2009 school closures actually ended up costing the district a whole lot of money. And once we can articulate that and show why and how that is, I think we can mobilize a broad base of community, of parents, of students, of teachers, educators of all kinds, and just everybody who has a little bit of sense will understand that if your goal is to save money, closing schools won't really do it. So I want to read to you an excerpt from the Seattle Times editorial that I co-authored in 2009. Here's the argument that I put out for why it wouldn't save money and why it would end up hurting our communities. I said, the Seattle Public Schools Superintendent Maria Goodlow Johnson and 5 school board members have enrolled the city's schools in a course titled Closing Schools for Excellence. We have been instructed that these closures of 5 schools and disruptions or discontinuations of 8 additional programs are fiscally responsible. We are told the decision will lead to better academic outcomes by eliminating empty seats and concentrating educational resources. However, the instructors of this course didn't analyze their lesson objectives and have produced a curriculum that will fail our students. To align the district's course for our schools with best teaching practices, we call on the district to enroll in, quote, a better vision of the Seattle schools, encapsulated by 3 remedial classes. First, basic math. The district estimates $25 million budget deficit. By the district's numbers, the proposed closings will only save $3.6 million in the next year, while disrupting the education of more than 3,500 students. This just doesn't add up, especially when the district has more than $30 million in a reserve fund. Next class, Introduction to Geography. During the last round of school closures in 2006, 20% of the displaced families migrated out of the Seattle Public Schools, and with them went the money the state pays per pupil enrolled. The total number of students involved in the current closure plan is approximately 3,562. Projecting only a 10% attrition rate directly linked to the closures, will lose about 356 students, and the $5,000 per student from the state funding, totaling almost $2 million a year. Additionally, if you factor in Initiative 782 funding and federal dollars lost per pupil, it could actually end up costing the district money to close schools. Moreover, the closure plan is beyond the borders of rational when we consider that by its own demographic projections, TT Minor, one of the schools slated for closure, is located at the center of Seattle's highest projected growth in school-age population. Final course, American History. The Seattle School Board approved with the 2 African-American members dissenting, a school closure plan that unquestionably targets families of color and lower income families. The schools targeted for closure: African American Academy, 99% students of color, 80.5% low income. Cooper Elementary, 77% students of color, 71% low income. Meany Middle School, 87% minority, 68% low income. Summit K-12, 50.2% students of color, 47% low income. TT Minor, 84% students of color, and 78% low income. The rationale behind the district's recent abolition of the Department of Race and Equity now becomes clear. Get rid of the agency that would cry foul when families of color were singled out in the closure plan. Course summary: shuttering a school is more than mothballing a brick and mortar edifice. It is hanging a close sign on the hopes of a community. Instead of the downward spiral of closing schools, fueling attrition rates, and claiming the need for then more closures, our district needs a plan for delivering the kind of quality education that will bring families back to the public schools along with the per pupil funding. There is an agreement, I'll cut that. With this school closure plan, it will lead to larger class sizes, doesn't provide any substantial savings, targets low-income families and students of color, and is devoid of long-range vision for the betterment of our educational community. Please believe that our fight to save the schools has just begun. Originally, they had twice the number of schools on the list. We were able, with the fight, to get about half the schools off the list. And that was important to those communities, but we lost five schools, and that they had to then reopen just very shortly afterwards. And it is very expensive to close a school. It's not just you close it and then you save the money. When you close a school, you have to have regular maintenance on it, right? There's all sorts of upgrades that happen even though there aren't kids there. So it ends up actually costing all that money to mothball it. And then it costs a whole lot of money to reopen it, to get it ready for kids again. And those costs are not factored in any of their projections when they talk about how much they're gonna save. What's the current budget deficit? 100 million. What do they say that they're gonna save from school closures? 30 million, right? So actually the closures are gonna cost them money. But even if they were to save the 30 million, it's not gonna make up the budget deficit. We would have to attract more kids back to begin to make up the budget deficit. That's a vision, that's a proactive vision for building the kind of schools our children deserve, that I think we all need to be in the struggle for. To do that, we're gonna have to organize. We're gonna have to make it very uncomfortable for people to make these kind of irrational decisions that just cave to the logic of there's not enough money, so we have to cut schools. In this city, with Boeing and Microsoft and Starbucks and Amazon, with wealth just dripping everywhere, there's plenty of money. The question is, do we build a fight big enough to get it for our kids and our schools? Thanks.
Jesse. All right, so next we're gonna have Dan Troccoli, who, like Jesse, is a longtime educator here in Seattle. Was very active in Seattle Chiefs Association and fought back against the cuts in 2009, and was a member of Social Equity Educators. And now he's in the Twin Cities and active there in the Twin Cities DSA. So Dan, take it away.
Hey all, dug the old shirt out and it still fits.
Yeah.
Let's see. I'll try to go a little less than 10 minutes because I think it would be good for a lot of questions. I see the crowd there, and that might be best for this. But I got my teaching license in 2008. and I was subbing. Subbing's not always a cakewalk, but there are times where you're just sitting around sometimes. So no, I probably had more time to read the shitty emails that they send to us about all the internal crap in the district than most teachers. And I was sitting there thumbing through, and I saw something about consultants, and I was like, "Uh-oh, that's not good." And it turned out it was a company called McKinsey and Company. And if you've ever looked into this company, if you've ever seen the movie The Firm, like with Tom Cruise and shit, the like horrible big company, that movie was based on this fucking company, McKinsey and Company. They're all over. They do a lot of things for a lot of like private and public sector organizations, and for schools, they definitely do this like efficiency modeling. And sure enough, like they brought in Darth Goodlow Johnson. She brought them in, and they started conducting listening sessions at schools that were potentially slated for closure. And I remember the three, Jesse, Vicky, and I, and I don't remember who else. I don't think there's anyone else at the time. We went to these listening sessions, and most of the time it was people just being like, "You shouldn't close my school because we got a new roof," or "You shouldn't close our school because our tests are through the through the stratosphere. We're doing great on tests." And a few, it didn't really take much. Like a couple, either Jesse or Vicky or I went up to the mic and would just be like, "You shouldn't close any schools, and here's why." We just look a cursory look at your budget, and there's money in the reserves, and it usually turned everything around. But it was a good chance to get people. And then we put a list together, and we had a meeting over Christmas break. I remember that must have been in 2009, and it snowed like crazy. And I remember thinking, no one's gonna come to this shit in Seattle, because who can walk, who can go anywhere in snow in Seattle? But it was a pretty big meeting. It was like 30 something people, and that was the beginning of it. We started this ESP Vision group, mostly parents. Like Jesse, Vicky, and I were the only teachers there. Later on, a couple of teachers who had done like an effort at a sort of militant caucus for just for voting and voting in different people joined us for a little bit too. But really, the fight was mostly parents. As Jesse talked about, the fight in the union, which I'll get back to in a minute, was well, it was a struggle. I think it's worth pointing out that that parent group ends up being like its own thing later on. It helped during the 2015 strike. They were the main backbone behind Soup for Teachers. They formed a full funding group after that fought for funding at the state level. And they also, one of those people, her name is Dora Taylor, she ended up running a group called Parents Across America for a while too. So, out of that group, out of that organization, like Jesse said, we weren't really we had some rallies and stuff. And I thought I remember something like 20 programs being on the chopping block. In the end, we halved it. It was like 10 programs, 5 sites, and a couple of joint programs or whatnot ended up being closed. But the value definitely was in what we ended up building. It ended up helping us throughout the rest of the time. We were trying to fight for public education in the city of Seattle. Couple things on the union side. I mean, I think Jesse pointed out, we went to all these different schools. We ended up building networks with them. I remember traveling Cooper quite a bit. We what do you call it? On the union side, I think it's worth pointing out. So the round of closures that Jesse's referring to, that Vicky was ended up pulling a vote for, that was a previous round of closures. I think like a few years before all that. And that's the one that the union ended up supporting, right? She called for a vote. Someone seconded it out of like compassion. And then they had a discussion, and the vote was like a landslide, with Vic being the only one who voted against. But when these 2009 closures came up, those three of us and some of those other folks that I mentioned, Robert Famiano and crew, we ended up trying to push through another vote again. We lost that. We ended up getting the union to take no position. And I remember back in the day thinking, damn, a victory, no position. I also think it's worth mentioning in both rounds of closures, the union, and this is a really important point for right now, the union claimed, in concert with the district, I think it was a president named Wendy Kimball who was running things back then. But, and she ended up working for the district, so she's kind of in their pocket. But they claimed that there was going to be no layoffs as a result of this. And I'll just say, any unionist worth their salt who believes that shit is out of their mind. Because I don't know how you close sites and don't lose people. It's just not possible. And sure enough, we did lose people. So it's food for thought for this time going around. I wish I had more numbers and stuff. Unfortunately, that all my docs on my computer got destroyed. I had a computer like a few years ago and it ended up getting destroyed. So I lost a lot of that stuff, unfortunately. But I think it would be good to take some questions and people can maybe get at some of the stuff we're missing. I also just close on one thing, which is that we are going through the same thing here in Minneapolis. They were gonna set this year as a year where they announced the number of closures and voted on them in the spring. It looks like they're going to delay that to the fall for us. I think they're going to try and think that they're going to overwhelm us with our negotiations, but they don't know that we're actually going to try and negotiate this year. But we're going through a lot of the same thing. We took $110 million cut last year. They did that because we're in the middle of negotiations to try to fuck us and try to put everyone on their put us back on our heels. But we ended up winning that this recent round of contract negotiations, but it's ironic they made that big cut. We lost a number of people. They're saying we need to close schools, but I've got classes at 30. My biggest class is 39. I got 37, 36. I'm a single class under 30. And this is true throughout most of our district, with the exception of a couple of hard hit schools. This is exactly, I think it's the lesson in this really important one for us to draw out. But when they talk about the cost of closing and reopening and whatnot, just like Jesse talked about, I think it is factored in. It's factored in because they're using this shit as a bludgeon against us. And that we have to wrap our heads around the fact that they have a different set of priorities than we do. And they follow people with the money. And I think the more we can convince people in the union and the community of that, the longer term fight we set the stage for. So I'll leave it at that. If people want to ask questions, I'm happy to jump back in. It sounds like in Seattle, it's not that different from what we're facing out here. You have a short-term fight to eliminate cuts. That's like the most immediate thing you need to do, right? But there's a long-term fight as well to not only save the schools, but frankly, to boost them up. I mean, I heard someone talk about charters out there, and I can't imagine they're that much. I can't imagine they're very significant compared to out here. I mean, this is the birthplace of that shit, and they're all over the place. We literally have a law in Minnesota that allows people to choose whatever damn school they want to go to, which usually bleeds the urban districts dry as they flee to the suburbs. But their tax base is still in the urban districts. It's a whole nightmare. But Seattle does have a big problem, because that last I knew, Seattle had the highest percentage of students going to private school of any city in the nation. So, I mean, you have to use the language of our asshole opponents, you have a market share problem, right? You have to eventually attract people back to the damn schools, the public schools. If we're gonna fix the funding thing, and that requires money. That requires an influx of money. I think. On the one hand, it's like this question of whether or not the district or the state, it's both. For us, it's both. We have to go after both. There's mismanagement in the district, and there's also not enough money coming from the state. And if we want a world-class education that's equipped to deal with not only climate change, but the ensuing migration crisis that comes from that, which we're only seeing a drip and a drop of, frankly, compared to what we know is coming, you need to fund it. You just do. It's just all there is to it. And I think you can make that argument with parents and with community members, that this is not simply a question of short-term fiscal crisis. It's also a long-term question of what are we doing here? What do we do? What do we want our schools to look like? I think people mentioning DSA, helping out to create something, is really important. Some of you said some comments that other members in SEA has said that communicate to me a lack of confidence that either the union or anyone in the city can beat this back. And if you build something stronger outside of the union, I think some of the SEA members will see that and gain confidence from it. You know what I mean? To jump in the fight themselves some more, because they know that it'll actually come to pass. I'll just say this two other little things. One, the charters are one concern. I think the bigger concern is online and AI. I think that's where they're taking us. If you at the socialist conference, there was what's her name? Lois Weiner gave a talk on that, and this is their next big thing that tech is going after. And we know they've been paving the way for this because all the crap that we've been dumping into Google Classroom for however many years now, it's all their property. They're using all of it, I'm sure, to beef that up. The only other thing I would add is that someone asked a question about the dynamic between C and SEA, and at the time of the school closures was no C. I mean, Jesse, Vicky, and I set out to create C because we were like, look, the union one supported the previous round of closures and then took at best a no position when in 2009, and we realized that like we had to build that presence inside the union. I think the SCORE is even in a better and stronger place for it. So in some respects, you're in a good position. I know sometimes momentum, it's not like it's a straight line, it goes up and down. So maybe there's more building to do. But I don't know what to tell you. I think now's a good time for this stuff. I think people are way more open to arguments, making intersectional arguments about various what do you call it, fronts of struggle, and particularly for questions of like taxing the rich and calling for much deeper criticisms of like the underlying foundations of our society. I find more and more people are open to it. And if they are out here in Minneapolis, I mean, shit, Radical Seattle's probably got a good ground base for that. So good luck to you all. Be watching.
Thank you, Dan.
Dan. Yeah, great discussion. There is a lot that was raised. I'll just try to hit on a couple things. I mean, we need to understand that closing 20 schools is just catastrophic. Closing 20 out of 70 elementary schools is absolutely next level. Like what we dealt with back in 2009 was bad, but closing 20 schools is a much higher percentage than what happened in Chicago, right? They closed 50 schools in Chicago, but when you look at the size of that city, right? This is going to be one of the largest mass school closures per capita that's ever happened, right? And we have progressive people in the school district who are apologizing for this and ushering it in. And we need to put it in those stark terms. It was Rahm Emanuel in Chicago who was putting through some of the worst neoliberal policies that did those 50 school closures. The entire left mobilized against that. And that was part of what CORE in Chicago was able to form around and build and transform that union, right? We see how disruptive closing 5 schools was in 2009, how many thousands of students' lives were disrupted and tens of thousands of families, right? This is a whole different level. One of the worst ever, right? And we have to fight with that urgency. But I think that you have a lot of advantages right now for fighting those closures that we didn't have in 2009. A union that the leadership was just completely hostile to any rank and file organizing or initiative. And that, as Dan said, that's why we launched our caucus, right? First, we formed this coalition of parents, students, and teachers to fight the school closures. And then that group became, the teachers that joined that group became C, right? And then, we did all kinds of things. The MAP test boycott, we fought for more recess and won that in the contract. Helping to push the union to go on strike around getting racial equity groups in all the schools and on and on. But it really came out of this fight. But now that SCORE is much more organized and actually has people in helping to run the union, there's a whole bunch of different potential for building a much broader fight. I would love to see SCORE and official SEA leadership host a citywide forum that include like going to PTA, right? And saying, your schools are gonna get closed. Can we do a joint meeting around this, right? So you're getting PTA folks, you're getting Seattle Student Union, and NAACP Youth Coalition, bringing together some of the best education activists in the city for like a big city forum, town hall style thing. Where you then have you have sign up for like a new coalition that can have some of the existing groups, but everybody. Is signing up for a new, like, Save Our Schools kind of campaign. I also think that we should invite the school board members to be part of it. There's progressive school board members who have been part of the fight for our schools and done great work for years. And we should give them the opportunity to be part of this struggle. There are gonna be school closures sweeping the nation right now. In the world's richest country, we only have the money to murder thousands of children in Gaza. We don't have the money for schools, right? And so there's gonna be waves of school closures all across the country. And there'll be some city that figures out how to fight back. And figures out how to build a broad-based campaign to expose the hypocrisy of this country and to fight and win the money that our kids deserve. And we need to go to our school board members and say, is that city gonna be Seattle? Are you able to join this grassroots broad-based effort, or are you gonna see that in LA with the LA Teachers Union leading that, or in Chicago with the Chicago Teachers Union leading that and getting broad community, or could we do that here? Are you ready to be part of that effort? And I think our school board and our superintendent should be part of pressuring the state to fully fund education. They could send out an email to every parent saying, your kids deserve the best schools. We're holding a rally at the state capitol on this day. There are school buses going from Seattle down there with parents, and we're all rallying for the money, right? Seattle schools could be part of this grassroots effort if they want to be. We need to give them the opportunity. If they turn it down, then we know where they stand. Right, and we can put a lot of pressure on them. But I think it's worth trying to work with some of those people to build a broad-based effort to keep the schools open. I think that was the main points I wanted to lay out. I appreciate you inviting me.